Now grab a hand that's not next to you. Each person grab a different hand from somebody else. I need a hand.
Carson.
Oh,
we need Aslan in there.
I need a better grip on this hand.
Aslan's hand's down there.
Make sure that your hand is me. You're holding two different people's hands.
Okay.
Is that comfortable for you?
Okay. Are we going to try to entangle each other?
You need to, but you can't talk.
There we go.
Yay.
Wait, say that again? You cannot talk and untangle.
Oh.
I'm going to be in here. You go around there. Turn around, go.
No talking.
Sorry, I like to think out loud.
You can think in grunts.
This is a predicament. Merp. Don't break any arms. Merp.
Wait, no, we're infinite. Yeah, infinite.
Merper.
Nice, everyone.
That was intense. That was scary. Move back over to the side.
That was quicker than I thought.
Grunting in pain.
I like sense.
Still express feelings.
I like sense some squeezes sometimes. I was trying to do something.
I mean, sometimes the knots, the human knot can be tangled very easily depending on where they grab, too. Who they grab.
It's a little strategy.
Yeah.
Other forms of communication that you noticed in that?
Merp.
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 But eye contact. Played a role into
I
things.
couldn't tell who was talking to me, and then I like looked at other people in the eyes, and I was like, "Merp." Oh, okay.
I think I was communicating a lot with my feet.
Kicking people in the face.
Move.
Yeah, definitely. So, what we did and what we're doing right now, in my perception, is creating a small community for a short amount of time that is within a larger community that we've created for a little bit of a longer set of time. But within that are, outside of that are bigger communities and bigger communities. And within all of those communities, how do you think communication serves us to solve problems? Why don't you take a minute to turn to a buddy and talk about that? How do you think communication serves your community to solve problems? And what are those problems? Scarcity, threats, fear?
If you can actually hear and know what you guys are talking about, you can like base it off of tone or actual words.
Like,
Yeah.
Kind of depends.
I'm in a mood for this.
I guess people have different interpretations, but when we're able to talk it out, it's way easier. Why would you do that?
Probably need your hand.
wet.
So,
Do a jellyfish thing.
warning.
Chicken water bubbles didn't work too well.
For sure. What about scarcity? How do you communicate?
Like, I guess there's a danger. Be like, yo, people, there's a danger. Brace yourself or whatever.
And like, sharing resources, like asking for what we need, creating. What do you? How do you think of that? Resources. They usually have something that they
Like, communicating with everybody and
We
not
help each other out. Some of you has more, some of you has less.
I've been thinking a lot about body language.
You want to wrap up those thoughts a little bit? Your community ends in your human community members, or maybe raise your hand if you'd consider that your community breaches into the sentient beings like the trees. Does your community include trees?
Yes.
Is that something you'd consider? Is there a way that you communicate with these trees to help solve problems like threats and shortages?
Chainsaws.
And trees are just one small example.
Their
I mean,
help.
yeah, right? The ways that we notice when things are struggling. Well, what about if you take us out of the equation? Do you think that the trees in this forest and the bushes and the shrubs and all of the different plant life communicate within each other to respond to threats and shortages of nutrients?
Yes.
How do you think?
Root systems?
Root systems is really close. It definitely has to do with the root systems.
like- Not exactly. Like releasing chemicals and stuff like that.
Awesome, you're definitely onto the right thing. Has to do with chemicals and root systems. What if I told you that there's an informational superhighway under the ground right now?
Wait, what?
Free internet.
Oh, right!
Let's tap in.
It is much like our internet, but it is actually by the plants. It's amazing. So everybody really quick, take your hands and wipe yourself a clear easel. Find 4 or 5 different objects that represent different members of a community.
how many?
4 or 5 or 6.
There's one.
And scatter them around your easel, kind of dispersed between each other. And I want you to right now, when you get those all laid out, draw what you think that informational superhighway would look like if all of them were connected to each other through communication. And everybody needs to be connected to everybody.
Circles.
Shield.
Shield.
Squiggles.
X's.
Lots of different shapes. What about you, Stephen? What are you seeing?
Lots of crisscrosses.
Lots of crisscrosses. As in? Circle. Awesome. Well, what we're going to do next here is we're actually going to get up and go and investigate the forest to try to find shapes like these. If they're going to be white, I'll tell you the color. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but I'm hoping that you can all discover them. I want you to think information super network. Use your hand lenses, and I'm going to be helping you discover. So you won't need your journals or your backpacks or anything. I am positive they'll be safe here on the side of the trail out of the way, but I recommend bringing your hand lens. We won't be going too far. You want to stay with it? Figure some things out here. If this is an informational superhighway, that is connecting plants together, where are we going to find it?
In the ground.
Okay. How deep do you think that we should go?
The middle of the
To China? That doesn't even that's not even real, right? We can't actually take to the magma.
I'd say at least 7.
Here's my rule to try to have the lowest impact. Everybody hold up their big finger.
Finger, this little finger. Which one?
It doesn't. It really doesn't even matter because the significance here is not the size, but what it symbolizes, which is 1 for 1 inch, which is probably to a middle knuckle of any of your fingers. There should be no need to go any deeper than that. And when we're done, make sure you just cover it back up because the earth is immodest and doesn't like to be naked. So we can all shuffle in to this path. I recommend looking at the bases of the shrubs instead of the trees. You'll usually find this network more easily. Dig your dirt, dig into the ground with your fingers, get a little dirty. It's okay. See what you can find.
Dennis, there's some lovely fields over here.
What?
It's a Monty Python reference.
Alright, that's on our network. How you doing, guys?
Let's see, ladies.
How you know? You seeing it?
Yeah.
You hurt me.
Sort of a bare spot over here. I found a lot over on that side.
Bring it.
Hi. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome.
Yay!
Yay!
What did you find?
Little dip. This thing's about that long.
Let me see.
There's the one right there. Over there.
Ah, most excellent, most excellent. How much more is there? Oh, they just keep going.
I got it. I
It's on
took
the
this one.
Wi-Fi. Do you know the password though?
Let me think. Password. That must be password.
Admin.
How you doing? Dead? Not so good.
What'd you find?
Choose the informational highlight
Wi-Fi.
forest.
Right, so that tree goes to that tree, that tree goes over to that tree, that tree goes to that tree, that tree goes over there, that one goes in here. And they all communicate with each other at the same time. You must hear a lot of voices.
They just hit each other.
Keep on covering and see how far it goes.
I broke myself. I mean,
Do you have any ideas on what they are? The others. Have we all learned a bit about fungus? Yes? Okay. So what we're looking at is something called hyphae, which is like a root-like structure that is of the fungus. Now this informational super network is related to something called mycorrhizae. Have we heard of this before? So put your arms out. This is called ecto. Kind of like you're giving a hug to an imaginary friend. If you were the mycorrhizae, you'd hug the root and then put your hands together. You got endo mycorrhizae. Now, Gavin, I see what you're doing here, and I would like it if you'd stop. Magnifying glasses and these hand lenses are not for lighting fires. Thank you. So, what happens is the hyphae forms around the root or inside the root and creates a symbiotic relationship. Who can share with me what a symbiotic relationship is? Gavin, or Rowan, I'm sorry, do you want to come up a little closer to everybody else? I feel like you're kind of away.
Yeah.
Maybe I can place myself better for you.
All over.
Yeah, put yourself in a little uncomfortable place. We all know what symbiosis is, yeah?
I think so.
Right. Is symbiosis always positive?
Well, no. Well, I don't think it's maybe fair to put things in a binary as positive or negative. I think sometimes things are both.
Right. So with symbiosis, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's a relationship, that it's not always beneficial to both parties in that relationship. Sometimes it's parasitic, where a fungus can be just leeching off of the plant that it's growing on. Or it can be like the mycorrhizae, in which it's mutualistic. And so the mycorrhizae is the relationship between the fungus and the plant. And it keeps branching out from there to create this informational supernetwork. Why would this be important to a forest ecosystem? Gavin, what do you think? What kind of threats that we were talking about before within human communities would be in a forest community that would need an informational superhighway? What is it communicating?
Information.
Like what?
Anything and everything you can think of.
Well, what do you think, Tekla?
There's lots of water.
So like water shortages and droughts? Sounds? What about fungal attacks? We thought about that. So on the outside of a forest, there could be diseases and other sorts of things threatening the trees. And so what a lot of research has come to found is that there's this mycorrhizal network under the ground communicates across the forest. And if there is an invader on the outside, the ones that are on the inside will get the message, and they'll start producing chemicals that will help them stand up stronger and more resilient to the outside attack.
Like people with chainsaws.
I'm not entirely sure what kinds of defenses that a tree could put up against chainsaws.
Falling on the person with the chainsaw.
That would be clever. I can only wish. Another thing that they do is they help protect little things. So a big tree could be taking up all the sunlight, but this younger tree that's under the ground trying to come up doesn't have any sunlight. And the larger tree will actually pass it food under the ground to help it grow up big and strong.
It's like parents.
Right. Now take a moment to think about, in your communities, how you could communicate to respond to attacks and shortages in those kinds of ways. And if you can connect that to the way a community could be perceivably strong or not. Like you have this really awesome community in Windward, and how much do you think effective communication plays in your success? You want to turn and chat with a buddy about that for a second.
It is now
For successfulness, train of thought, where'd you go?
It'll come back.
Wait, what was the question?
How do you think communication has helped you in your communities, like Windward, or maybe in our community here this week, or within your family, or?
I mean, you got the head of the school, which is basically, oh, this, and this is happening. And you got the students, and you got ASB, which correlate a lot like the trees with the younger trees. They feed us the information so we can grow upon it.
That's pretty cool. What about like maybe with one of your friends? I know. I rely on my friends actually.
Yeah.
Communicate when maybe I have a shortage of.
Yeah. Yeah.
You feel the same way?
Yeah. We find one of my friends and I have a very, very odd friendship. It's more based around us picking on each other sort of a thing. But, you know.
Yeah, just in a joking way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Small nudge. That's one thing.
Small nudge.
But we respect the boundaries, and we respect what, if it's time to stop, we stop, sort of thing.
How do you think respect plays into this? Like, communication has.
Our respect is like, well, I ain't gonna help you no more. Cut off supply.
Cut off supply? if there isn't respect?
Not enough
I think
respect.
that
I would say.
communication does help with everything, no matter what. Because
What are you doing for you?
Bring out this entire little inner part.
I'm in.
You help with the. What you're in charge of decoration,
making a
or was that
canoe.
Aslan?
For what?
And everything like there's
I think
different.
that was
Kind of
Aslan,
wrap up
but
our
like
thoughts.
boosters rep for ASB, so like I go to the boosters meeting and like I get information from there and then take it to the ASB and then take the ASB information to the boosters and communicate like that. So
The big long line of passing the message along. Yeah.
Definitely on teams and everything else.
Bring it back. Threats or shortages. And what does that mean? What is a threat and what is a shortage of what? Bryce, do you want to start it off?
When Steve and I were talking, we thought about how, just like when one tree gets more sunlight or more nutrients and we'll hand it down, that within our communities when someone's feeling down and maybe someone has a little more energy and they can hand that off to us through communication and all those other ways.
Anybody else have any thoughts to add to that? What about how... Oh, sorry, Rowan, were you going to...
Yeah. Tegel and I talked about how it can benefit one thing or another, like a chain reaction. Like, for an example, we all have been doing this community project to do something, and for, the group that I'm in, our project is making a bee house and offering them shelter and stuff like that. And we had an actual beekeeper come in and show us his measurements foot by foot. Gavin built it. And, we all built it. And knowing that and knowing where to place it, so like we're giving it to the community garden to promote the bees around there and stuff. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a really good example. Thanks for sharing that.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I was just thinking over here about how our minds are really tuned to capitalist culture. So the idea that of Adam Smith's trickle-down effect, the people who have all the money and who are embracing capitalist culture in the most intense way will then trickle down this money to the people lower. And that when we think about mycorrhizal networks, it might be tempting to think into that space, to think, the strong trees are the ones that provide. But I think in a different way, it's probably more like a socialist system where everybody is contributing. All the different organisms are contributing through different networks, and your bigness or smallness doesn't matter. So certain trees or certain species that might be connected in through the mycorrhizal network might be quote unquote better at smelling or seeing or feeling or sensing different threats or needs of the community than others, and then provide that service to the larger group without it's like the unconditional love thing, right? It's like without the need for the reciprocity, it will just do it because that's what it does, and that relationship is just what it is. So it's interesting thinking about that, because at least my mind tends to think, it's kind of like the capitalist system, and everybody will be just pull yourself up by the bootstraps and you'll be fine. But it's not at all like that. I think it's probably much more supportive.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's keeping track in the forest.
Right, there's no Wall Street.
Right.
sorry.
Yeah, what's up?
It just reminded me, or made me think about too, of like this idea of susceptibility almost. Like maybe the things that are more permeable or have less defense mechanisms are the ones who are more attuned and aware of the information that's being relayed versus like something that's really like sturdy and tall and has like thinking about like how big a tree is
versus how big and like vulnerable the things that are like underground are maybe in comparison. And how that like that's reflected in communities in the sense that like maybe the canopy of that tree isn't totally aware of what's going on, and, like some disturbance in like the ground. And that's kind of like like in seeing that reflected in our social systems of like the most vulnerable populations are the ones who are being affected and have a far more nuanced and larger view of like the disturbances of the community.
With all that being thought, let's venture back into that trail for a minute. I want to see what you think about this. Where is it getting its energy?
That tree.
How?
It's a tall tree, so wee.
Right. So do you think it's utilizing this mycorrhizal network to be passing nutrients to the stump? So with what we were just talking about, what do you think that relationship is? Do you think this is just some energy sapping thing, just taking up everything from this tree? Or do you think that the stump could be contributing?
I think the stump could be contributing. Because you're really close to the ground, so it's like, it can't do anything. This has to stay away or I'm going to die. And this tree right there, he's just like, I don't care about if something comes along. I'm a big, strong tree.
Any other thoughts? I think this stuff could be contributing to the greater body of the forest.
Well, we could be doing the exact same thing as all the other trees. It's just that those trees are more simply channeled to here, but this tree's more so sending it out. Maybe not as much energy because it's trying to use it to grow back, but it's still doing the same thing.
You know, my thoughts too is that time is not something that the forest is concerned about, and that the investment in this body to grow larger and to produce needles and photosynthesize again. Do you know what I mean? Is that right now at this moment it might not be photosynthesizing, but the fact that it's getting there is valuable to the overall productivity of the forest. And so again, reflect that back into your life. And maybe there's times that you might feel like this stump. Maybe there's times that you feel like this tree. And maybe there's times that you feel like both. Or neither. Or maybe there's times... What's up, Rose?
I would say sometimes you feel like neither,
Sometimes you feel like neither.
and yet you're still connected.
You're still connected. Maybe you feel like that working great. Just hanging out, watching from the outside.
Is it the
My
outside?
favorite.
Is it the outside? Yeah, it's a good question. What is the outside?
Is there an outside?
There is an outside.
Where
We're in it right now.
is there an
Oh,
inside?
we're inside our box.
You got the right.
Yeah,
Yeah, that too.
we're inside our ecosystem.
We're always inside.
We are.
We're always inside and outside
Do we
of
want to
something.
shuffle back out to the path and kind of wrap this up?
Shuffle, 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 shuffle.
Excellent.
Yeah, no, that's good because, you know, sometimes I'm hard on myself.
You can choose how you'd like to do this. If you could take the next 5 minutes to reflect on what we just talked about. And you can either just talk with a friend, or you could write down in your journal, or you could, I encourage you to talk with everyone else. But we just talked a lot about communication between each other, but maybe also between yourself and the way that you perceive the productivity within your community, and also inward. And if that brought up stuff, I want to invite you to just take a minute to reflect on that.
What do you mean by productivity?
I think we were just kind of talking about how we can perceive one member, like that tree, of being maybe just not productive and just sucking energy, but then considering the idea that maybe it is being very productive and purposeful to the overall system. Like Rowan, you just had something really cool to share the way that you were processing that. Would you care to share that with the group? Or
Yeah, sure. I guess that sometimes I can feel like the stump to where if I'm setting aside time for myself, or I know other people that do this, that they feel really bad or like they're very selfish for taking this time to reflect and kind of take care of themselves. But the thing is that you can't help others if you can't even help yourself, or you're not even, well enough to help take care of others. So, I mean, you just have to realize when it's your turn to do either of those things, and when, you need to back off. So, yeah, for yourself and for other people.
thanks, Rowan.
We can stay here if you want. We need another minute, but I'm going to encourage you to start heading toward the beach for lunch. Thank you so much for joining me for this adventure. And good participation and conversation. That was really good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you.